Some people spend their entire lives afraid of death, thinking it's the worst thing that can happen to someone. I thought so too, until I discovered something much worse than dying. It's dying inside while continuing to breathe. It's having your soul shattered into 1,000 pieces while your body remains intact. It's discovering that the man you called a hero your whole life was actually the cruelest villain in your story. You know what's worse than death? When your best childhood memories become trauma triggers. When the lap that rocked you hides the hands that violated you. When your own flesh and blood, who should give their life for you, is exactly who takes away your life without killing you. And worst of all is when this happens on the day you're wearing a wedding dress, surrounded by flowers and smiles, thinking you're living the happiest moment of your existence. Because death, at least, has the decency to be final. But what I experienced that night in 1975 continues to kill me a little every day, even after almost 50 years. It's a death that has no funeral, no permitted mourning, no consolation. It's a death you carry in secret while smiling to the world. Because how do you explain that you were murdered inside by the man everyone admired on the day everyone was celebrating your happiness? Good morning to everyone watching. My name is Eleanor Bernard, but here in rural Virginia, everyone knows me as Grandma Ellie. I'm 68 years old, with some well-earned wrinkles that tell stories and a heart that's been through so much. Before I begin my story, tell me in the comments how many children and grandchildren you have. I love reading comments from fellow grandmas with beautiful families who fought and raised their children with grit and so much love. Let's fill this video with stories of mothers and grandmothers, because that too is strength and inspiration. And look, if this story touches your heart, please leave a like full of affection, subscribe to the channel to be part of this special community, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Each like, each subscription is a hug I receive from you, and that's what gives me strength to continue telling what many people prefer to hide. I was born right here in Whispering Pines, Virginia, in a simple house on Maple Street, at a time when the streets were still dirt roads and everyone knew everyone. My family wasn't rich, but we weren't needy either. My father, Herman, worked in the coal mine, and my mother, Olivia, took care of the house and us 5 children. But the one who really ran the family, who everyone respected and admired, was my paternal grandfather, Colonel Theodore Bernard. Oh, my grandfather. If you'd asked me back then who my hero was, I would have answered without hesitation, Colonel Theodore. He wasn't really military. He earned the title Colonel because he was a prosperous landowner with property, cattle, and political influence. In Whispering Pines, his word was worth more than law. When he spoke, everyone listened. When he arrived at church on Sundays, people would stand to greet him. Politicians from the region would come to him for advice. To me, he was simply the most affectionate grandfather in the world. He always had candy in his pocket, always had a lap available, always had a story to tell. When I was little, he would sit me on his knee on the porch of the farmhouse and tell me about the old days, about how he had built everything with his own hands. His eyes would shine when he looked at me. "You're my favorite granddaughter, Ellie," he would always say, and I believed it completely. Colonel Theodore was a handsome man, even with his graying hair and wrinkles. Tall, strong, always well-dressed, with that trimmed mustache he made a point of keeping impeccable. He had a firm, decisive voice that inspired respect and trust. In town, they said he was a fair, generous man who helped those in need. When someone was in trouble, it was he who arranged employment, who lent money, who solved problems. At home, with the family, he was affectionate and protective. My grandmother, Constance, treated him like a king. My uncles and my mother always asked his opinion on everything. No important decision was made without consulting Colonel Theodore. Marriage, work, moving, buying a house, everything went through him first. And with me, he had a special affection. From a young age, I was the apple of his eye. When I turned 15, he organized a beautiful party at the farm. When I finished high school, he gave me a gold necklace that had belonged to my great-grandmother. "For my intelligent girl," he said, hugging me tightly. I felt like the luckiest granddaughter in the world. I grew up hearing everyone in the family talk about how lucky I was to be the Colonel's favorite. My cousins were jealous. My siblings complained that he gave me more attention. It's because Ellie is the most studious, my mother would always defend. It's because she has the family's ways, my father would say. But I knew it was more than that. I felt that his affection for me was different, special, unique. Colonel Theodore always encouraged me to study. In an era when few girls from rural areas continued their education after elementary school, he insisted that I go to school in town. "My little granddaughter is going to be a doctor," he would always say with pride in his voice. He paid for my studies, my books, even a typing course I wanted to take. It was during one of those trips to town to study that I met Benjamin. Benjamin Allen, a hard-working, honest young man from a simple but respectable family. He worked at the town clerk's office, had a way with numbers, dreamed of having his own small business someday. He wasn't the richest match I could have found, but he was a good man, of character. When I told my grandfather I was dating, he wanted to meet the young man. He called Benjamin for a talk at the farm, one of those serious conversations that every family patriarch has with his daughter's suitor. Benjamin was nervous, poor thing, but he did well. He answered all the questions honestly, talked about his plans, about the respect he had for me. "He's a good young man," the colonel told me afterward. "Hard-working, respectful. He has my blessing." I was on cloud 9. My grandfather's approval was all I needed to be sure that Benjamin was indeed the man of my life. The engagement lasted 2 years. 2 years of much planning, because my grandfather wanted our wedding to be the event of the year in Whispering Pines. "My favorite granddaughter deserves a celebration worthy of her," he would always say, and he really spared no effort. He hired the best band in the region, ordered sweets from the best bakers, had my dress made by a famous seamstress from the city. The farm looked beautiful for the wedding. My grandfather had a special stage built for the ceremony, decorated everything with flowers, illuminated the yard with colored lanterns. There was food for 300 people, drinks of the best quality, music until dawn. On the morning of my wedding, I woke up early at the farm, where I had stayed the last few days to organize everything. My grandmother, Constance, helped me get ready. My mother, Olivia, cried with emotion. My aunts all talked at once about how beautiful I was. The dress was a white dream, with delicate lace, a long train, and a veil that had belonged to my great-grandmother. I looked in the mirror and could hardly believe it was me. I looked like a princess from a fairy tale. "You look beautiful, my daughter," said my father Herman when he came to get me. The colonel is emotional out there, can barely contain his tears. The ceremony was perfect. The pastor, who had been a family friend for decades, performed a beautiful ceremony. He spoke about love, family, commitment. Benjamin looked handsome in his new suit, nervous but happy. When we exchanged rings, I felt I was living the most important day of my life. After the ceremony came the celebration. The band played, people danced, ate, and drank. It was pure joy. My grandfather was radiant, greeting the guests, receiving congratulations, telling everyone how proud he was of his granddaughter. And then came the time for his speech. Colonel Theodore climbed onto the stage, asked for silence, and began to speak. His powerful voice echoed throughout the farm's yard. "My friends, my dear family," he began. "Today is a special day for all of us. We are here to celebrate the union of my most beloved granddaughter, Eleanor, with Benjamin, a young man I already consider a grandson." He spoke about my childhood, about how I had always been a special, intelligent, affectionate girl. He told funny stories, emotional moments, talked about the dreams he had for me. His voice broke when he said he saw me as a daughter, that I was the light of his eyes. "Ellie," he said, looking directly at me, "you have always been my special girl. Since you were little, I knew you were different from the others. You have something unique, something that captivated me from day one. And today, seeing you there so beautiful, so happy, I can only thank God for giving me the privilege of being your grandfather." Tears ran down my face. Everyone applauded emotionally. Even the toughest men in town had misty eyes. It was the most beautiful speech I had ever heard. At that moment, feeling loved, protected, surrounded by my family and the man who had just become my husband, I truly believed I was the luckiest granddaughter in the world. My grandfather's affection, that special love he had always shown for me, made me feel unique, chosen, blessed. Little did I know that behind those affectionate eyes, those sweet words, all that protection, lurked intentions that an innocent girl like me could never have imagined. The man I loved and respected most in the world, who had organized the happiest day of my life, was about to turn it into the worst nightmare I had ever experienced. The party was at its peak when my grandfather came down from the stage after that beautiful speech. People were still commenting on his words, about how moving it had been. I was dancing with my husband Benjamin when I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Ellie, my dear granddaughter," it was Colonel Theodore's voice. "Come here. I want to give you a special toast." I looked at him and saw he was carrying 2 glasses. The crystal sparkled under the colored lights of the lanterns. The golden liquid foamed delicately. "What's that, Grandpa?" I asked curiously. "It's French champagne," he said with that affectionate smile of his. "I've been saving this bottle for years, waiting for the day of your wedding. It's a toast just for the 2 of us, before the party ends and you leave with your husband." My heart filled with tenderness. Even on my wedding day, he was still thinking of me in a special way. Benjamin smiled too, finding the gesture beautiful. "Go ahead, honey," my husband said. "It's a special moment between you 2. I took the glass my grandfather offered me. It was cold, heavy, elegant. I had never had French champagne before. In fact, I had never had anything stronger than communion wine. "To you, my most beloved granddaughter," he said, raising his glass. "To the beautiful and special woman you have become. To all the unique moments we have shared and those we will still share." "Thank you, Grandpa," I responded emotionally, "for everything you've done for me, for all the affection, for organizing this wonderful celebration." We toasted and drank. The champagne had a different taste, somewhat bitter, stronger than I expected, but it was special to be there with him, having that intimate moment in the middle of the party full of people. "Drink it all, my child," he said gently. "It's for good luck in marriage." I obeyed. I always obeyed my grandfather. I drank the whole glass, even though I found the taste somewhat strange. He also drank his, gave me a little kiss on the forehead, and returned me to Benjamin. "Now you can continue dancing," he said, smiling. "Enjoy the party well." I returned to my husband's arms. The band was playing a romantic song. People continued celebrating, talking, laughing. Everything was perfect. But about 20 minutes later, I began to feel something strange. First, it was a slight dizziness that I thought was from the emotion of the day. Then my legs began to feel heavy, as if they were full of lead. "Benjamin," I whispered to my husband, "I'm feeling a bit strange." "How so, honey?" he asked, concerned. "I don't know. Kind of dizzy. My legs are weak." He held me more firmly. "Must be fatigue, right? It's been a long day, lots of emotion." I tried to agree, but the sensation was getting worse. My vision began to blur. The voices around me seemed to come from very far away. The colored lanterns turned into blobs of light, dancing in front of me. "Benjamin, I think I need to sit down," I said, but my voice came out slurred, different. "Of course, honey. Let's find a chair." But before we could move, my grandfather appeared at our side, as if he had noticed my discomfort from afar. "What's wrong, Ellie? Not feeling well?" "She's a bit dizzy, Colonel," Benjamin explained. "I think it's fatigue." My grandfather looked at me with that expression of concern I knew so well. The same look he had when I was little and got sick, when I hurt myself playing, when I needed care. "My poor granddaughter," he said, touching my forehead. "It must indeed be fatigue. It was too much for one day, and the champagne might have hit her hard too. She's not used to alcohol." My mother Olivia approached, also concerned. "What's wrong, my daughter?" "She's a bit weak," the colonel explained. "I think she should lie down a bit to recover. She can't be like this on her wedding day." "Where can she rest?" Benjamin asked. That's when my grandfather had the idea that at the time seemed perfect, full of care and affection. "Let me take my granddaughter to one of the rooms at the back of the house," he said. "It's quieter there, away from the noise of the party. She can rest for a few minutes and come back refreshed." My mother agreed immediately. "Yes, it's cooler there too." Benjamin hesitated for a second, but then agreed as well. "Are you sure it's not an inconvenience, Colonel? An inconvenience to care for my dear granddaughter?" "Never," my grandfather responded, already supporting me. It's the least I can do for her. At that moment, his attitude seemed like the most natural thing in the world. That's how it had always been. When I needed something, he was there. When I got hurt, he carried me. When I got sick, he took me to the room and stayed with me until I got better. "Thank you for the care, Colonel," said Benjamin. "How long do you think she'll need?" "Oh, about 30 minutes should be enough," my grandfather replied. "The important thing is for her to recover well." Then he supported me, almost carrying me, because my legs really weren't obeying properly. We walked through the party, passing by guests who continued celebrating. Some asked if everything was all right, and my grandfather quickly explained that I just needed to rest a bit. The walk to the house seemed eternal. Each step was an immense effort. My head was heavy, my thoughts confused. It was like being in a bad dream, where everything happens in slow motion. "Calm down, my granddaughter," my grandfather said softly as he supported me. "We're almost there. You're going to lie down a bit, and you'll be fine." We entered the big farmhouse. The back rooms were far from the main room, down a long corridor. It was the quietest part of the house, where the noise from the party really didn't reach. He took me to a room I knew well. It was where I always stayed when I spent time at the farm as a child. It had a large, comfortable bed with fragrant sheets that my grandmother always kept neatly arranged. "Here, my child," he said, helping me sit on the edge of the bed. "Lie down a bit and rest." I tried to lie down, but everything was spinning. It was as if the whole world was on a crazy Ferris wheel. My body wasn't obeying my commands. When I tried to speak, the words came out jumbled. "Grandpa, I can't." "No need to speak," he said gently. "It's just fatigue. Relax and it will pass." He helped me lie down properly on the bed, arranged the pillow under my head, pulled a light blanket to cover me, caring gestures from a careful grandfather that I had seen 1,000 times before. But then I heard a sound that made me force my eyes to stay awake. It was the sound of a key turning in the lock of the door. "Grandpa," I managed to whisper, confused. "Why are you locking it?" "So no one will disturb you, my granddaughter," he replied with the same sweet voice as always. "So you can rest in peace." At that moment, my still innocent mind didn't understand the danger. Even with that strange sensation in my body, even with the door locked, I still completely trusted him. He was my grandfather, the man who loved me, who protected me, who had just organized the wedding of my dreams. The last thing I clearly remember was him approaching the bed again. My eyes were too heavy, my body completely without strength. It was as if I was sinking into a thick fog, where sounds became distant and images blurred. "Rest, my special granddaughter," I heard his voice like a distant echo. "Rest, and Grandpa will take care of you." And then everything went dark, but not the darkness of normal sleep. It was a heavy, forced darkness, where my mind struggled to stay awake, but my body simply couldn't respond. It was like being trapped inside my own body, conscious but completely defenseless. It was in this horrible state that I realized the champagne wasn't just champagne, that my grandfather's special care wasn't just care, that isolated room with the locked door wasn't just a place to rest, but it was too late to scream, too late to run, too late to ask for help. I was completely at the mercy of the man I trusted most in the world on the day that should have been the happiest of my life. The heavy darkness began to lighten slowly, like when you're coming out of anesthesia. First, the sounds returned, but they seemed to come from underwater. Then the sensation of my own body on the bed, but it was as if I were just an observer, unable to move. My eyes opened, but everything was blurry. The room was in semi-darkness, with only a beam of light entering through the half-open window. I tried to move my arms, but they didn't obey. It was desperate. My mind was functioning. I understood where I was, but my body remained dead. And then I realized I wasn't alone in the room. My grandfather's figure was there near the bed, but he was different from the caring man I knew. His movements were furtive, his hands trembled slightly. When our eyes met, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before, a strange, hungry gleam that made me feel a fear I didn't even know existed. "Woke up, my beautiful granddaughter." His voice was different, lower, hoarser. "Good." I was waiting. I tried to speak, tried to ask what was happening, but my tongue was too heavy. I could only emit confused sounds, as if I were moaning. "Shh, no need to speak," he whispered, getting closer to the bed. Grandpa knows what you need. That's when I felt his hands touching my face. The touch that once brought me security now made me shiver with dread. His hands were different, more lingering, more invasive. I tried to move my head away, but I managed only a minimal movement. It was like being trapped in an invisible armor, aware of everything, but unable to react. I've always been in love with you, Ellie, he whispered in my ear. Since you were little. You're so special, so different from the other girls in the family. His words froze me inside. Those phrases that I always thought were affectionate from a grandfather, proud of his granddaughter, took on a completely new and disgusting meaning. All these years I've waited, he continued, his hands now touching my arms. Waited for you to grow up, become a woman, and today, at your wedding, you're so beautiful. I tried to scream, but only a hoarse whisper came out. My entire body went into panic, but I couldn't move. It was the worst nightmare I could imagine, being completely vulnerable in the hands of the one I trusted most. He began to mess with my wedding dress. His hands, which had so often hugged me with a grandfather's affection, now violated my body with repugnant lust. You can't imagine how many times I've dreamed of this moment, he murmured. How many times I've looked at you growing up and imagined. Tears began to stream from my eyes. It was the only reaction my body could have, crying silently, while the man I loved most in the world tore me apart inside. I tried to focus on the party outside. I could hear the distant music, the laughter, the voices of people who were celebrating my wedding. My husband was there, my family, my friends, all thinking I was just resting. No one will suspect, he said, as if reading my thoughts. Everyone thinks Grandpa Theodore is a saint, a good man taking care of his sick granddaughter. His hands continued exploring my defenseless body. Each touch was a betrayal, a breach of trust that hurt more than any physical pain I had ever felt. You were always my favorite. Do you know why? He whispered. Because you're like your great-grandmother, Mercedes. She was mine too, a long time ago. The revelation shocked me even more. My great-grandmother, the saintly woman everyone in the family revered. He had done this to her too. Ah, like Mercedes, he continued, lost in his own perverse memories. And now I have you. The same beauty, the same gentle way. I wanted to vomit, wanted to die, wanted the earth to swallow me. How had I been so blind? How had I never noticed that behind all that affection lurked such dirty intentions? His hands became bolder, more invasive. My wedding dress, that symbol of purity and joy, was being profaned by the man who should protect me from all harm. You'll like it, my granddaughter, he whispered. Grandpa knows how to please a woman. I tried to concentrate on other things, on my happy childhood, on playing in the yard, on Sundays at church, anything to mentally escape from that horror. But then, I heard a noise that made me strain all my muscles to pay attention. Footsteps approaching down the hallway. Ellie, it was Benjamin's voice. Ellie, honey, are you okay in there? My heart raced. My husband had come looking for me. I tried to scream, make any noise, but my voice still wasn't working properly. My grandfather froze for a second, then whispered in my ear, Stay quiet. We don't want to ruin the party, do we? The footsteps came closer. I heard Benjamin's voice again. Closer now. Colonel, are you in there? Is Ellie better? My grandfather quickly moved away from me, fixed his clothes, ran his hand through his hair. In seconds, he was back to being the helpful grandpa as always. Yes, my son, he responded, but didn't open the door. She's resting, still a bit weak. Can I see her? Benjamin insisted. Better not to wake her now, my grandfather responded. She's sleeping deeply. Must be the effect of the champagne. There was a pause. I sensed that Benjamin was hesitating, probably wondering if he should insist or not. Are you sure she's all right? He asked again. Of course, I'm taking care of her, aren't I? Another pause. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would explode in my chest. It was my chance, perhaps the only one. With all the strength I could gather, I tried to make some noise, a moan, a movement, anything that would draw attention. And I succeeded. A tiny sound, almost imperceptible, but it came out of my throat. What was that noise? Benjamin asked, alert. It must be her stirring in her sleep, my grandfather responded quickly. Normal, but Benjamin wasn't convinced. I heard him messing with the doorknob. Why is it locked? His tone changed. It became more suspicious. So no one disturbs her, my grandfather explained, but I noticed nervousness in his voice for the first time. I just want to see if my wife is okay, Benjamin insisted, more firmly now. There was a moment of silent tension. Then I heard the key turning in the lock. Of course, my son, my grandfather said, trying to sound casual. Just don't make noise to wake her. The door opened slowly. The light from the hallway invaded the dim room. I saw my husband's silhouette in the doorway, looking inside. For a few seconds he said nothing. He was trying to understand the scene. Me lying on the bed, apparently sleeping, my grandfather standing beside me. But then his eyes adjusted to the dimness, and he noticed details that he shouldn't have seen. My dress was disheveled in a way that made no sense if I was just sleeping. My hair was too messy. My tears still wet my face. Ellie, he called worriedly, taking a step into the room. That's when I managed to emit another sound, clearer this time. A moan of desperation that carried all the horror I was experiencing. Benjamin looked at me more attentively and saw that my eyes were open, but glassy, that I wasn't sleeping, but in some strange state. What's going on here? His voice became louder, harder. Nothing, my son. My grandfather tried to stay calm. She's just... But Benjamin didn't let him finish. He took a few more steps into the room, got close to the bed, and that's when he saw everything. The state of my dress, the way I was lying, the terror in my eyes, the tears, and mainly, he saw that my grandfather's clothes were disheveled too. My God in heaven, he whispered, his voice trembling with shock and anger. What have you done to her? It's not what you're thinking, my grandfather tried to explain, but his voice no longer had that firmness of always. Ellie! Benjamin shouted, running to me. Ellie, talk to me! I tried to respond, tried to move, but I was still trapped in that body that didn't obey me. I could only cry harder. That's when Benjamin understood everything. The strange drink, my grandfather's excessive care, the isolated room, the locked door, my altered state. The scream that came from his throat was one of pure pain, of animal rage, of someone who had just discovered that the person he trusted most had committed the worst possible crime against the one he loved most. You wretched man! And then he threw himself on top of my grandfather with a fury I never imagined my gentle husband could have. The sound of bodies colliding echoed through the room. Benjamin, who had always been a calm, polite man, transformed into a beast. I had never seen so much anger in someone. He grabbed my grandfather by the collar of his shirt and threw him against the wall with a strength I didn't know he had. You disgusting animal, he shouted as he punched Colonel Theodore's face. How could you do this to her? My grandfather, even being a strong man, was at a disadvantage. Benjamin's anger was of frightening intensity. He hit and shouted, and there I was on the bed, still unable to move properly, watching that scene that seemed straight out of a horror movie. Stop! Stop! My grandfather moaned, trying to protect himself from the punches. You don't understand. It's not what it seems. Not what it seems! Benjamin's scream was so loud that surely the whole party heard. I saw everything, you bastard! I saw what you were doing to my wife! The screams drew attention from outside. I began to hear voices approaching, footsteps running down the corridor. The confusion was spreading. What's that noise? I heard my father Herman's voice. Seems to be coming from the back rooms, said someone I couldn't identify. Benjamin continued beating my grandfather, who was now on the floor with his face bleeding. It was a horrible scene, but at the same time, I felt a strange satisfaction seeing that man being beaten after what he had done to me. Come here! Come see what this monster did! Benjamin shouted to those who were arriving. My father was the first to enter the room, followed by my uncles and some other people from the party. What they saw left them in total shock. Benjamin on top of Colonel Theodore, beating him like a madman. Me on the bed, clearly altered, tears on my face, dress disheveled. Benjamin, what madness is this? My father shouted, trying to understand the situation. Madness? Benjamin turned to him, eyes injected with rage. The madness is what this demon did to your daughter. What are you talking about? My Uncle Jack asked, confused. He drugged Ellie, put something in her champagne, Benjamin shouted, gesturing furiously. Brought her here, pretending he was going to take care of her, and abused my wife. The silence that fell on the room was deafening. Everyone looked at me, then at my grandfather fallen on the floor, then at each other, trying to process what they had just heard. "That's a lie!" my grandfather shouted from the floor, spitting blood. "This boy has gone crazy. He's making things up." "A lie?" Benjamin went back at him. "Then explain why the door was locked. Explain why she's in this state. Explain why your clothes are disheveled." My mother, Olivia, entered the room at that moment and almost fainted when she saw the scene. She ran to me. "Ellie, my daughter, what happened?" she cried, trying to make me react. I managed to whisper a few words. My voice was still slurred, but it worked a little better. "Mom, the champagne." It was enough for her to understand. I saw my mother's face transform. Confusion became understanding, then horror, then a rage I had never seen in her. "Father!" she screamed, looking at Colonel Theodore. "What have you done to my daughter?" "Olivia, my daughter, you know me." He tried to appeal to her. "I would never do such a thing. This boy is crazy." But my mother wasn't foolish. She knew the signs, knew my behavior, saw my state, saw the tears, saw the desperation in my eyes. My God in heaven," she repeated, running her hands through my hair. "My daughter, what did he do to you?" More people arrived in the room. My grandmother Constance, my siblings, several wedding guests. Soon the small room was full of people trying to understand what was happening. People's reactions were divided. Some, especially the younger men, sided with Benjamin, also wanting to beat my grandfather. Others, especially the older ones, who had known the colonel for decades, couldn't believe it. "This can't be true," said my Uncle Frank. "Colonel Theodore is a good man. There must be some confusion." "Confusion?" Benjamin turned to him, furious. "Then come here and see the state of my wife. Come see if this is confusion." My grandmother Constance approached me carefully. She had a strange look on her face, as if she were recognizing something she had seen before. "Ellie," she whispered, "tell Grandma what happened." With much effort, I managed to form a few sentences. I told about the strange champagne, about how I felt ill, about my grandfather's touches, about what he had whispered in my ear. Each of my words was like a punch in the stomach of those who heard. I saw my father turning white, my brothers clenching their fists, my mother crying uncontrollably. But it was my grandmother's reaction that caught my attention the most. She didn't seem surprised. She seemed confirmed, as if something she had already suspected had finally been revealed. "Constance," my grandfather pleaded from the floor, "you know I wouldn't do this. We've been married for 40 years. My grandmother looked at him with a contempt that froze the blood of everyone in the room. 40 years, she repeated, her voice trembling. 40 years pretending I didn't see. 40 years making myself blind. The room fell into a deathly silence. What was she saying? "Constance," my grandfather tried to interrupt. "Shut up," she exploded for the first time in her life. 40 years knowing you had this problem. 40 years praying that you wouldn't do to our granddaughters what you did to our daughters. The bomb exploded in the room. The daughters? He had abused his own daughters. "What is this story, Mother?" my father asked, his voice trembling. My grandmother looked at him with tears in her eyes. Your father has always had this sickness, Herman, since your sisters were little. I knew, but in those days we didn't talk about these things, didn't denounce husbands. I thought that with you children growing up, with the girls getting married, he would stop." "Mother," my Aunt Nancy, who was in the room, turned as white as paper. "Forgive me, my daughter," my grandmother cried. "Forgive the mother for not protecting you. Forgive me for being a coward." My grandmother's confession changed everything. The people who still doubted were shocked. Colonel Theodore's mask had definitely fallen. My Uncle Jack, who had always been the most explosive in the family, moved away from me and went straight for my grandfather. "You bastard! You did this to my sister too?" he shouted, kicking the fallen man. "With Mercedes too," my grandmother continued confessing, as if she needed to get out 40 years of kept secrets. "Your great-grandmother, Ellie, he did it to her too when she was young. That's why she went a bit crazy at the end of her life. That's why she talked to herself." She never forgot. Each revelation was worse than the previous one. Generations of women in our family had been victims of that monster, and no one had ever said anything. "And you knew everything and never did anything?" my father shouted at my grandmother, also revolted. "What could I do?" she cried. It was another time, Herman. Women had no voice, no rights. If I spoke, who would believe me against a respected colonel? The discussion was getting more and more intense, everyone shouting at once, some blaming others, some defending, others attacking. My grandfather on the floor, getting beaten whenever someone passed near him. And there I was on the bed, still half-drugged, watching my family tear itself apart in a matter of minutes. The dream wedding had turned into a lifetime nightmare. That's when I heard sirens approaching from outside. Someone had called the police. "Good!" shouted Benjamin. "Now this demon will pay for what he did." But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. I knew my town, knew my grandfather's influence. Even with all the evidence, even with all the confessions, the fight was just beginning. The sound of the sirens grew louder. The police were arriving. My wedding celebration was over. My family was shattered. But at least for the first time in generations, the truth about Colonel Theodore was being exposed. The police entered the farm as if they were invading enemy territory. Two uniformed men, one older who clearly knew my grandfather, another younger who seemed confused by the whole situation. "What's this commotion here?" asked Sergeant Adams, the older one, looking around the room full of people. "Sergeant," Benjamin went straight to the point, "this man drugged and abused my wife on our wedding day." The sergeant looked at my grandfather on the floor, then at me on the bed, then back at Benjamin. His expression was of someone who didn't want to be there. "Colonel Theodore," he said, helping my grandfather to get up. "You're hurt. You need medical attention. What he needs is to be arrested," my Uncle Jack shouted. "This monster abused our girl." Calm down," the sergeant tried to control the situation. "Let's have order here. What exactly happened?" That's when I noticed something that made me even more desperate. Sergeant Adams was treating my grandfather with respect, with care, as if he were the victim. The younger policeman looked at me with compassion, but the older one, who was in charge, clearly didn't want to believe what he was hearing. "Sergeant," my mother approached him, "my daughter was drugged. Look at her state. She needs to go to the hospital for tests." "Of course, Mrs. Olivia," he responded, but without much urgency. "We'll arrange that, but first I need to properly understand what happened." My grandfather, even with his face swollen from the punches he had taken, tried to resume his authoritative posture as always. "Sergeant Adams," he said, cleaning the blood from his mouth, "this son-in-law of mine has gone crazy. I was taking care of the girl who fell ill, and he attacked me without reason." "Without reason?" Benjamin exploded again. "I saw you on top of her. I saw it with my own eyes." "You saw what you wanted to see," my grandfather retorted, recovering that eloquence of his. "I was merely checking if she had a fever, if she was breathing well." "Then why was the door locked?" my mother asked furiously. "For her to rest in peace," he responded with nerve, "without being disturbed by drunks from the party." I saw the situation slipping through our hands. My grandfather was intelligent, manipulative, and had known those policemen for years. They had worked together, drunk together. He had probably already done favors for them. With much effort, I managed to sit up in bed. My voice was still weak, but I needed to speak. "Sergeant," I called for his attention. He put something in my drink. The champagne had a strange taste." The sergeant approached me, but his expression was more of doubt than concern. "Young lady, you drank a lot at the party. Sometimes alcohol can cause mental confusion." "I wasn't drunk," I shouted, using all the strength I had. "He drugged me." "Ellie has always been a fanciful girl," my grandfather said calmly. "Since she was little, she invents stories, exaggerates situations. Must be wedding trauma, nervousness." It was unbelievable how he managed to turn the situation in his favor. 40 years of impeccable reputation weighed more than all the evidence. But then my grandmother Constance stepped forward. "Sergeant Adams," she said in a firm voice, "I need to speak with you in private." "Constance, there's no need," my grandfather tried to interrupt for the first time, showing real nervousness. "Yes, there is," she shouted. 68 years old, and today is the first day I'll speak the truth about my husband. The sergeant, curious, called her to a corner of the room. My grandmother began to tell everything about the daughters, about my great-grandmother Mercedes, about decades of silent abuse. I saw the sergeant's expression gradually changing. He had known my grandmother for years. He also knew she would never lie about something so serious. "Constance," he whispered, "why did you never say anything before?" "Because it was another time," she responded, crying. "Because there was nowhere to run. Because he threatened me. Said he would have me committed to an asylum if I opened my mouth. But today, seeing what he did to my granddaughter on her wedding day, I can no longer stay silent." The younger policeman, who was listening to everything, approached the sergeant. "Chief, I think it's better we take everyone to the station to file a detailed police report." "There's no need for that," my grandfather intervened quickly. "It was a misunderstanding, a momentary confusion." "Confusion? Nothing of the sort," my father exploded. "My daughter is going to have a forensic medical examination right now." That's when I noticed that my grandfather became really nervous. A forensic medical exam would show the drug in my blood. It would show evidence of the abuse. It was irrefutable proof. "Herman," he tried to appeal to my father, "you are my son. You've known me since you were born. Are you going to believe all this madness?" My father looked at him with a mixture of pain and disappointment that broke the heart. "Father," he said, his voice trembling, "if what they're saying is true, you're not my father. You're a monster." At that moment, more people arrived at the farm. The town doctor that someone had called and the district attorney who lived nearby and heard the commotion. Dr. Wallace, the doctor, came straight to me. "Ellie, how are you feeling?" I told him about the symptoms, the sudden dizziness, the weakness, the loss of coordination, the preserved consciousness, but the paralyzed body. "I need to run some tests," he said. "Seriously, this really seems like intoxication by some substance." The district attorney, Mr. Richards, was a younger man, recently arrived in town, who didn't have the political ties of the older policeman. "What's the situation here?" he asked, looking around. Benjamin was the one who explained everything, from the strange champagne to the moment he found my grandfather abusing me. The DA listened to everything attentively, taking notes. "Doctor," my mother addressed him, "my daughter needs to go to the hospital for tests, and this man needs to be arrested." "We'll follow all legal procedures," Mr. Richards responded. "First, your daughter will be examined at the hospital. Then we'll take all the statements at the police station." My grandfather tried one last card. "Mr. Richards, you know me. I'm a respected man in this town for decades. This story makes no sense. Why would I do such a thing?" The DA looked at him coldly. "That's exactly what we're going to find out, Colonel." Meanwhile, the wedding guests who were still at the farm began to leave. Some whispered among themselves, clearly shocked. Others seemed not to believe what they had witnessed. The news would spread through town like wildfire. By dawn, everyone in Whispering Pines would know that the respected Colonel Theodore had been accused of abusing his own granddaughter on her wedding day. They took me to the hospital in Bedford, the larger nearby city. Benjamin went with me, holding my hand during the entire journey. He didn't talk much, but I could feel the anger still boiling inside him. At the hospital, they did all possible tests. They collected blood, performed a gynecological exam, photographed the bruises that had begun to appear on my body. Each procedure was one more humiliation, but I knew it was necessary. The nurse who attended to me was an older woman with a gentle look. "My child," she said while collecting a blood sample, "you're very brave to report this. Many women don't have that courage." "I wasn't brave," I replied. "I just got lucky that my husband found me in time." "Even so," she insisted, "now you can help other women who went through the same thing." The test results came out a few hours later. They confirmed the presence of chloroform in my blood, a substance that couldn't have gotten there naturally. The gynecological exam confirmed the abuse. They were irrefutable proofs. Even with all my grandfather's influence, there was no way to deny those results. We returned to Whispering Pines the next day. The town was in an uproar, groups of people talking on street corners, all talking about the scandal at the Colonel's farm. At the police station, I gave my formal statement. I told everything in the minutest detail, from the strange champagne to the moment Benjamin arrived in the room. My grandmother also gave her statement. She told about decades of silent abuse, about the daughters who had suffered, About my great-grandmother, it was the first time in her life she spoke openly about those horrors. My grandfather, even with all the evidence against him, continued denying everything. He said it was a conspiracy to destroy his reputation, that Benjamin and I had set it all up to inherit his lands, but the medical exams didn't lie. And my grandmother's testimony, a woman respected by the entire town, carried enormous weight. The DA, Mr. Richards, requested the preventive detention of my grandfather. The judge, even being a family friend for years, had no choice but to accept in the face of so much evidence. Seeing Colonel Theodore being led away in handcuffs from the police station was one of the most surreal scenes of my life. The man I had admired since I was little, who the entire town respected, who had power and influence, was being treated like a common criminal. And that's what he was, a criminal who had hidden behind a mask of respectability for decades. The family divided exactly as Benjamin had predicted that terrible night. On one side were my mother, my father, my siblings, some uncles and cousins who believed the truth. On the other were those who couldn't accept that the family patriarch was a monster. My grandmother Constance, for the first time in 40 years of marriage, made her own decision. She asked for legal separation. At 68 years of age, she decided to start life anew, away from the man who had made her a silent accomplice to so many abuses. The trial took months to happen. During that time, more victims appeared. Women from the town who had been abused by him when they were young, but had never had the courage to speak up. My grandfather's political influence tried to interfere with the process several times. Powerful attorneys were hired, witnesses were pressured. They even tried to bribe the DA, but the truth was stronger than any influence. In the end, Colonel Theodore was sentenced to 20 years in prison for statutory rape, corruption of minors, and forming a gang to cover up sexual crimes. 20 years. At 74 years of age, he would probably die in prison. The sentence brought relief, but not peace. The trauma of what happened that night stayed with me for a long time. I had to do therapy, face nightmares, deal with distrust and fear. My marriage with Benjamin, which should have begun with joy, began with deep scars. But he gave me the greatest proof of love anyone can give. He stayed by my side, supported me, fought for me when I didn't have the strength to fight for myself. The town was never the same after the scandal. The colonel's reputation spread throughout the region. Whispering Pines ceased to be the quiet town where everyone knew each other, to become the place where the worst crime happened on what should have been the happiest day. But it also brought positive changes. Other women felt encouraged to report abuse. A support group was created in town. People began to talk more openly about domestic violence and sexual abuse. My story, as painful as it was, ended up serving to break decades of silence and protect other potential victims. The years that followed were of reconstruction. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but slowly Benjamin and I managed to build a life together on the ruins of that terrible night. We moved from Whispering Pines 2 years after the trial. The town was too small, the wounds still too open. Everyone knew our story, and as much solidarity as some people showed, there were also those who looked at us with morbid curiosity or even with distrust. We went to Richmond, where Benjamin got a job at an accounting firm, and I could start over away from judging looks. In the capital, we were just another young couple trying to build a future. The first year in Richmond was difficult. I had constant nightmares, panic attacks when I saw men who reminded me of my grandfather. Any unexpected touch, even from my own husband, made me tremble. Benjamin had infinite patience with me. He never pressured me, never got irritated with my crises. He always reminded me that there was time, that we would go at my pace. "Ellie," he would always say when he saw me entering one of these crises, "you're no longer that defenseless girl. You're a strong woman who had the courage to face a monster, and I'll always be here by your side." Therapy helped me a lot. Dr. Martin, the psychologist I began to see in Richmond, taught me techniques to deal with trauma, to separate the past from the present. It was 2 years of weekly sessions until I managed to sleep a whole night without waking up sweating. In 1978, 3 years after that fateful wedding, our first child, John Benjamin, was born. Holding that baby in my arms was an indescribable sensation. For the first time since the night of the abuse, I felt there was something pure, something good, something worthwhile in life. Benjamin cried when he saw his son for the first time. "Look at that," he whispered. "Our family is growing. Something good was born from our pain." John was a calm, smiling baby who brought joy to our home. Taking care of him gave me purpose, made me focus on the future instead of remaining a prisoner of the past. 2 years later came Mary Elizabeth, a smart, talkative girl who completed our family. As the years passed, the wounds healed. They didn't completely disappear. Traumas like that never completely disappear, but they became more bearable. I learned to live with them, to not let them control my life. In 1982, I received news by mail that deeply shook me. My grandfather, Colonel Theodore, had died in prison, heart attack at 81 years. 7 years after the conviction, he had finally paid his debt with his life. When I read the letter, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because that monster could never hurt anyone again. Sadness for the memory of the man I thought he was when I was a child, before discovering his true face. "How are you feeling?" Benjamin asked when I showed him the letter. "Free," I responded after thinking a while. "For the first time in years, I feel completely free." We didn't go to the funeral. My grandmother Constance, who had moved to Bedford and rebuilt her life at 70, didn't go either. "He died to me a long time ago," she said when I sought her to talk about his death. The 80s were tranquil for our family. Benjamin prospered at the company. I dedicated myself to raising the children and later returned to study. I had always wanted to be a teacher, and at 35, I finally realized that dream. Teaching brought me enormous satisfaction. Working with children allowed me to do something positive, to contribute to forming better people, and, in a way, to always be alert to signs of abuse in the school children was my way of preventing others from going through what I went through. During my career as a teacher, I identified at least 5 cases of child abuse and managed to help those children. It was painful to relive my own story with each case, but knowing I could make a difference in their lives compensated for any suffering. John grew up and became a lawyer, specializing in family law. "I want to help families that went through situations like ours," he would always say. Mary Elizabeth became a pediatrician. "I want to take care of children, protect the little ones," was her answer when asked about her professional choice. Both always knew the family history, but in a way adapted to their age. As they grew, I told them more details, always emphasizing that we managed to overcome, that we built a good life, despite the initial trauma. "Mom," John said to me one day, when he was already a grown man, "you are the strongest person I know. What happened was horrible, but the way you dealt with it, how you raised us, how you helped other people, that's inspiring." In 2008, when I retired from school at 52, I decided to do something I had been planning for a long time. I opened a support group for women victims of sexual violence in Richmond. New Beginnings, as we called it, met every Thursday in a small room provided by the neighborhood church. At the beginning, we were just 5 women, me, who facilitated the group, and 4 participants, all with different stories, but with the common pain of having been violated by people they trusted. With time, the group grew. We came to have 20 women participating regularly. During the 15 years I coordinated New Beginnings, I helped more than 200 women rebuild their lives after sexual traumas. There were stories of daughters abused by fathers, wives raped by husbands, girls violated by relatives. Each story hurt as if it were mine, but also gave me strength to continue. Mrs. Ellie, one of the participants, told me once, "You saved my life. If it weren't for this group, I wouldn't have made it." Comments like that made me feel that my pain had served for something greater, that my trauma had transformed into a tool to help other people. Benjamin supported me in everything. When I arrived home, emotionally exhausted after the groups, he was always there with a hot tea and a welcoming hug. "You're doing beautiful work, love," he would always say, transforming pain into healing. In 2010, at 67, I decided to stop coordinating the group. I was tired and felt I had given my contribution. I passed the coordination to a younger psychologist who had participated in the group as a volunteer for years. That's when I began to think more seriously about telling my story publicly. For decades, I had helped women individually or in small groups. But what if I could reach more people? What if my story could reach thousands of people through the internet? My grandchildren, John's and Mary Elizabeth's children, always encouraged me to do this. Grandma, Julia, my oldest granddaughter, would say, "Your story can help a lot of people. You need to tell it to the world." It took me a few more years to decide. It was hard to expose like that, to strangers, the most painful part of my life. But at 68, I finally found the courage. I started by making some simple videos, telling pieces of my story. The response was immediate and moving. Women from all over America began to write to me, telling their own experiences, thanking me for giving voice to what they felt. "Mrs. Ellie," wrote a young woman from Chicago, "I never managed to tell anyone that my uncle abused me when I was a child. Hearing your story, I finally had the courage to seek help." Messages like that arrived every day. I realized that even decades after that horrible night, I could still make a difference in people's lives. Benjamin, who was already 75, helped me with the videos. "Now that we're old, we can use our experience to help the younger ones," he would say, smiling. Unfortunately, in 2020, my Benjamin passed away. Diabetes that became complicated during the pandemic. It was 45 years of marriage, 45 years of companionship, of love, of overcoming together. He left me at 74, and I found myself alone for the first time in almost half a century. The pain of the loss was immense. That man had been my foundation, my safe harbor, my proof that there was still goodness in the world after all the evil I had experienced. But even in pain, I remembered the words he always said to me, "Ellie, you are stronger than you think. You survived the worst. You can survive anything." It was thinking of these words that I decided to continue telling my story, now also in his name, because Benjamin was a fundamental part of my healing, of my reconstruction. It was only fair that he also be remembered as the hero he was. Today, at 68, I live alone in a simple house in Richmond, surrounded by the affection of my children and grandchildren. I have a quiet life, but one full of purpose. Every day, I receive messages from women who were inspired by my story to report abuse, to restart their lives, to not give up. And that's why I'm here today telling all this to you, because I know that somewhere in America there is a girl or a woman going through what I went through, thinking there's no way out, that nobody will believe her, that life is over. I want that person to know, yes, there is a way out. There are people who will believe you. Life isn't over. You can rebuild your story. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick, but it was possible. And if it was possible for a girl from rural Virginia who was abused by her own grandfather on her wedding day, it's possible for anyone. Fear may seem bigger than you, but you are stronger than you imagine. Shame may try to silence you, but your voice is more powerful than any shame. Pain may seem eternal, but it can transform into strength to help others. If you've made it this far, if you've heard my entire story, I want to ask one thing. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a like so more people can find this video. Because each subscriber, each like, is one more person who can find hope in my story. And if you'd like to share where you're watching from, please leave a comment below. I love connecting with viewers from all across the country, knowing that my story at Grandparents' Tales is reaching people everywhere. We're not alone in this fight. Together we are stronger. Together we can break the silence that protects abusers. Together we can build a world where no child needs to go through what I went through. My story didn't end on that terrible night in 1975. In fact, that's where it really began, because it was from that pain that I discovered my true strength. And you can discover yours too. Believe me, you are stronger than you imagine.